The Resident Evil 4 remake just launched a few days ago, and it's time for more Steam Deck coverage. So we're going to dive into Resident Evil 4, the original. Now let me explain. I wanted to play the remake on my Steam Deck, but the demo plays very poorly. Graphical glitches, low frame rate, and it's just not a good experience. The demo performance has improved since launch, but even when you lower things down and make the game look awful, it still can't even hit 30 FPS in enclosed areas. So instead of diving into a possible performance disaster, for now, let's look back and dive into the original game, which is plenty playable on the Steam Deck, and perhaps they can optimize the 4 remake in the future like they did with Village. So, let's see how the Steam Deck plays Resident Evil 4, 2005. Now to start, what is Resident Evil 4? Technically, it's the 6th mainline game to be released, after 1 through 3, 0, and Code Veronica. And it's the game that really popularized the franchise. Gone are the overhead fixed camera angles, and in came an over-the-shoulder horror game that felt more like a third-person shooter than true survival. It changed the franchise so much they didn't venture away from the over-the-shoulder perspective for almost a decade with 7 and Village, and even then, they went right back to over-the-shoulder with the remakes of 2 and 3 and the DLC for Village. Now the first thing to say is that Resident Evil 4 HD on Steam is not a good port. It never was. Capcom gave us very few settings to tweak and only offered options to have fixed frame rates at 30 and 60. It had a bunch of weird slow motion issues too if you couldn't make that 30 or 60 mark, though the Steam Deck can mostly compensate for that. Let's dive into settings. I wouldn't bother modifying textures. Switching it from HD to original doesn't really change the performance. And with other options, we have fixed frame rate, shadow quality, motion blur, and anti-aliasing. With these options, you don't have to do much to get a high frame rate, though if you do get that weird slowdown motion effect this port is known for, adjust the Steam Deck's forced frame rate settings and it will correct itself. Knowing this, what's the outcome of performance? Keep everything cranked up and you'll get a solid 60 frames per second with dips into the 58 range from time to time. Small enough that you probably won't even notice unless you have an FPS counter on screen. But there is one weird little hiccup. On the Steam Deck, there are little stutters, and it does stutter quite a bit. These are not shown on the FPS counter, but you will see the game just kind of hesitate for a second as you move around. It's not something crazy game-breaking or anything, really just an annoyance, and something you can't really get rid of. If you go in and lower the graphical options like anti-aliasing and shadow quality down to low, it will happen a lot less, but it'll still happen. And going into more Steam Deck settings like changing the refresh rate, locking the FPS down to 30 instead of 60, all of that doesn't really help. The stutters will still happen. After you make the change, they might not for a while, but they will come back eventually. And that's pretty much all I got for performance. Outside of the little stutters, it plays great. As you'd expect from a game that's almost 20 years old, but still, this isn't a great port, so the Steam Deck has to do a lot to compensate for that. Now let's go into battery life, which is great. With brightness all the way up, you're going to get over 4 hours on the Steam Deck, and you'll get nearly 4.5 with the brightness down. That is a major amount of life by Deck standards. It's technically a little bit less than a Switch OLED will get on RE4 Switch port, but still, for a Steam Deck game, it's great. Now let's wrap this up. Would I recommend Resident Evil 4 2005 to Steam Deck users? It might be a little weird and sad right now to not just go straight into the remake, but I would. It's crisp, clear, and you can get a nearly endless 60 FPS. There is the little stuttering problem, but if you're okay with that, it's a great game regardless of whether the remake is better or not. And that's all I've got for you today. I'll be back soon with more Steam Deck videos and reviews. As always, thank you for watching, and have a great day.